Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the African and Middle Eastern Division, Ahmed, and the Hebraic section at the Library of Congress, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Letters in Light, an American Illuminates the Bible. My name is Yoram Bitton, and I'm the Chief of the African and Middle Eastern Division. We are honored to host manuscript artist and author Debra Band, whose remarkable illuminated manuscripts bring together biblical interpretation, Jewish tradition, artistic creativity, and American cultural ideals in a truly unique way. Today, Debra will discuss 5 of her biblically illuminated manuscripts recently acquired by the Library of Congress. Through these works, she explores texts such as the Song of Songs, Psalms, the narrative of women in the Hebrew Bible, the Friday evening Shabbat liturgy, and Qohelet. Her manuscripts are not only visually stunning works of art, but also deeply thoughtful interpretations that connected ancient texts with contemporary questions of identity, faith, memory, and national values. This evening's lecture will offer us as a rare opportunity to hear directly from the artist about her creative process, the symbolism and layered meanings embedded in her manuscripts, and the inspiration behind these remarkable works. We are especially delighted that these important works are now part of the library's collection, where they will inspire researchers, scholars, artists, and visitors like you for generations to come. Please now, I want to welcome Debra Band.
We could move that to the table over here. So yes. But thank you. Couple more elements. Thank you. Thank you, Yoram. And thank you to all of you for coming this evening. Someone really needs to pinch me. Unfortunately, my husband's on the front row. This extraordinary library that embodies the American imperative to understand our world, that guards our centuries of learning and expression, has been my fantasy forever home for this work forever. So now it's truly mind-boggling that 5 of my manuscripts indeed live here. Each of these book projects grew out of a particular intellectual and spiritual challenge, quite apart from the technical challenge posed by each. Each painting interprets the passage at hand with complex symbolism, fusing biblical text and rabbinic commentary with Jewish history, modern academic Bible scholarship, and many aspects of Western arts, sciences, and other thought. And I can't even truly begin to summarize these ideas tonight, but we can talk about them later. Instead, what I'd like to share with you is an unintended quality that's come as rather a surprise to me. Let's see, somehow we're not moving. Help. It's not moving. These buttons were moving before. Sorry. The joys of high tech.
What?
What's the problem? It was there an hour ago. Sorry, people. Yeah, it worked an hour ago. Ah. Eureka. Ah, we're on. Okay. Technology rules. Okay. When I look through this body of work through an art historical lens, which is a very odd feeling exercise to apply to my own work, I see that while these manuscripts deal expressly with the Bible and many aspects of Jewish literary and community history and traditions across continents, centuries, and cultures, every single one is imprinted with the civic values and opportunities of life in the United States from my childhood in the 60s through our current day. And that's what I'd like to share with you tonight. The very research and intellectual challenges I mentioned could only have been accomplished, all the more so for a woman, in a society that guarantees, like America has always done, freedom of speech for all. Seen this way, it's more appropriate for this work to reside within these walls than any other place in the world, and I'm so grateful to Dr. Bitan and his wonderful staff, who I've known for so long, for making this real. I hope that the manuscripts will delight people and inform scholarship in an even broader way than they have up to now. But before I go any farther at all, there are a handful of other people who helped in many diverse ways to bring about this lovely event. Sharon Mintz of the Jewish Theological Seminary kindly arranged for Dr. Bitan and me to meet. Sharon and Steve Lieberman of my own community nearby in Potomac generously funded the publication of several of the books for which I created these paintings. And then there's my family, my English-Ukrainian rabbinic family that passed along its ancient heritage of devotion to Jewish thought and tradition, my late first husband, Debra Band, a NASA astrophysicist and deeply learned Hebraist, without whom I could never have begun this work, and his late father, the seminal scholar of Hebrew literature, Arnold J. Band, with whom I collaborated several times, and whose spirit continues to hold my feet to the fire. I owe inspiration and learning to my remarkable collaborators on these projects and my dear friends and study partners, Judd Subar and Diane Sharon. Given that we're in the nation's library, I should add certain elementary and high school teachers in Chattanooga and Atlanta who first shaped the critical abilities that informed these manuscripts. My sons, Tzvi and Gabriel, grew up with my work. They and their families inspire my compulsion to convey the love of Jewish learning and American civic values to our next generations. And I don't even know how to begin to thank my husband, Michael Diamond. We met and married while I was painting the Qohelet Shabbat book, and the mystical union expressed in that ecstatic liturgy has been realized in our own marriage down here below the heavens. Let me orient you a little bit in the art of illuminated manuscripts, a revered tradition in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism for millennia. I hope you've seen some of the illuminations in the display next door, but let me explain the materials and methods here. These three paintings, we're going to start at the left, are all, pretty much include all these media methods. Most of the paintings are around 13 by 15. Almost all are painted on exceptionally fine kosher calfskin vellum that I get from a scribe in Israel, in ink, gouache, that is opaque watercolor, with 23-karat gold, palladium, which doesn't tarnish, instead of silver, which usually does, even in closed manuscripts. The methods I use are traditional in Jewish manuscripts: calligraphy, very detailed painting, gilding, and paper cutting. Few of the techniques and media in this noble cultural tradition have changed much since about the 10th century, although the ideas they embody certainly do evolve and adapt to new community circumstances. At left here, you see the frontispiece of my Song of Songs book, which introduces its central metaphor of the walled garden. That wide micrographic border, you can see a scrap of micrography in the bottom right, that it presents the entire book of the Song of Songs. Micrography, literally tiny writing, is a specifically Jewish scribal art involving designs made of lines of tiny, something like 2-point calligraphy. And no, I don't use a magnifying glass, just my eyes, thank God for my eye doctor, and every pen or brush stroke or cut is done by hand. Now, in that painting at the left, you can also catch some of the show-through of the colors from the other side. This is the only one of my books where this happens. Why? Well, I expected that if I ever finished this project, I'd have it bound and it would just sit on my shelf. So I did things the old-fashioned way and painted on both sides of the parchment. Now, calfskin is translucent, slightly see-through. But surprise, it was only as I finished the project and started showing it to a few friends around my dining room table that I got loud and incredulous cries that this really had to be published and exhibited. And so, on a lark, never really expecting anything, I sent a proposal to the Jewish Publication Society, and to my absolute shock, they instantly said yes. So, because I painted on both sides of the skins, you can see the show-through. And let me tell you, minimizing that while preparing the paintings for printing and then fabricating the traveling exhibit so that both sides could be visible was a challenge. And that was the last time I painted on both sides of the vellum. Excuse me, I am parched. Let me 1 sec. The middle image here is the final text page of my Qohelet book, my most recent book. In addition to everything in the painting at right, you can see the Hebrew and English calligraphy. Now, both languages have evolved many styles or hands of calligraphy. The Hebrew script that I generally use is one that I developed myself, closely related to the traditional Torah script known as Stam, but simpler, without the decorations, the tagin, that taught many of the letters. The English script is my version of a script and printing font called Legend, which was first designed in Weimar, Germany, to replace the heavy ubiquitous German black text lettering for printing of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And I love the way the letters dance in this alphabet. You can see here a scrap of micrography and also a decorative calligraphic border, which is one of my ways of introducing related texts that relate to my interpretation of the biblical text at hand. This border carries a short poem by the remarkable 11th century Spanish Jewish poet, general and grand vizier, Samuel the Nagid, about the need to seize life despite accepting the inescapability of eventual death. The third piece, toward the right, is the introduction to the book of Ruth from my third book, Arise, Arise, Deborah, Ruth, and Hannah, which I began as a memorial to my late first husband. Each of these three women's stories begins with an introductory paper cut. These paper cuts are on fine paper, and you can see the painting and gilding as well here. Now, there are traditions of paper cutting across Europe, and before that, the medium was brought to early medieval Europe from China, where paper originated. The Jewish tradition, brought to Europe by Jewish traders, however, is the only one I know of that elevates paper cutting to the fine arts in manuscripts. My ketubot include extensive paper cutting, but in my book manuscripts, I use paper cuts like this, mostly to divide sections or chapters. One of the exceptions to that rule is in the other room, and as end sheets for the printed books. I usually do paper cuts on a fine, heavy cotton rag paper, since the vellum has a really annoying habit of trying to go back to the shape of the calf when it's cut into delicate shapes. Now, before I leave this slide, take a look at the honeybee at the top right corner of the middle painting from Qohelet. There is a honeybee hidden in almost every painting in all but one of my books. Why? Well, my name, Dvorah, is the Hebrew word for honeybee. And since the Song of Songs book, long before I started actually keeping bees in my garden, as I do now and my grandchildren love, I've used it as a kind of game with the medieval custom of the written colophon, in which scribes would identify themselves in a line or two at the end of the book. These works were created in an environment of religious freedom, that rarest of conditions across the sweep of Jewish history. There is no single work I can show you here that explicitly conveys this idea, but the very existence of my entire opus is predicated upon it. Now, I don't begin here with religious freedom carelessly. I spent my early years in Chattanooga, Tennessee, born a few months after my parents, a lawyer and homemaker and Hebrew teacher, both British Empire rabbinic kids, came to this country. I adored my public elementary school, a 1915 building built on a Civil War battlefield, Union victory, with a mostly very loving faculty. Each Wednesday morning, though, a Southern Baptist Bible teacher came into the classroom for publicly sponsored religious instruction. My young parents, who worked doggedly to give their 3 kids a strong and secure sense of Jewish learning and life in tandem with American culture, arranged with my beloved principal and teachers to allow me to leave the classroom and spend that weekly Christian Bible study hour in the school library. My favorite place in any case, was no hardship. I loved our annual school plays, but similarly needed to be excused from participation in the all-consuming Christmas pageant. My children and grandchildren have never needed to be separated from their classes because of state-sponsored religion. We moved, yes. Ever since the separation of church and state, respecting all religions, but without governmental endorsement of any specific religion, to protect our individual equal rights, has been an essential American value in my life. Everything you will see here is predicated upon growing up in this country under laws that, since the Constitution's ratification, have protected my abilities to live undisturbed by state-mandated religious practice, by religious violence against minorities such as my own, to grow up in both public and Jewish day schools, achieve a graduate degree from one of the great universities of the world, MIT, to travel, create, write, and publish freely, including with both the Jewish Publication Society and the Christian Baylor University Press. All of this has been possible by the historically rare and precious religious neutrality of American law. Having said that, I've shaped much of my work not only around Jewish tradition per se, but also relating how we Jews and Christians share the poetry and prose of the Hebrew Bible, while always recognizing that we may understand them differently. I'm showing you now 2 of my interpretations of Psalm 29 that celebrate the overwhelming, even terrifying power of our providential God. The larger images that you see are from I Will Wake the Dawn Illuminated Psalms, which happily resides here. In that book, which was published by JPS in 2007, I worked with several Christian theologians, one of whom is now a dear friend, to provide information on the liturgical roles of each of those 36 psalms in various Christian denominations. The smaller images at right are from my current project with the eminent Anglican theologian at Oxford, Susan Gilliam, which goes further to present an interreligious dialogue approach to these beautiful poems that we share. Here, in this project, we have a greater educational goal: to provide visual interpretations of the Psalms that can be understood simultaneously by both religious traditions, often mutually exclusive as those understandings are. We have no intention to try to reconcile theological differences, but simply to demystify our beliefs to one another's communities, and so help ease the tensions caused by ignorance and misunderstandings. Our approach is inspired by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's notion of the dignity of difference, and we pray it will smooth the path for mutual acceptance in a political background of continued religious freedom. Like many of us, I grew up singing in school the song America the Beautiful, first composed in 1893 by a Wellesley English professor during a holiday in Colorado. The little inset you see there is an edition of it that I made, that's in the Library of Congress. And I've been lucky to, first composed in 1993, and I've been lucky to travel to and live in several of the landscapes that the song references. And many of the paintings reflect my love of the land. Here are some of my own impressions of Colorado. At the left, you see my painting of this lyrical verse from the Song of Songs, inspired by watching the dawn over the Rockies in Aspen, where my husband was participating in the Aspen Physics Institute. At right, you see my illuminations of Psalm 23, inspired by a family hike up to a hanging lake above Glenwood Springs, Colorado. That tranquil lake protected from pouring down the mountainside by the narrowest imaginable lip of rock seemed to me to embody the faith in divine protection that the psalmist celebrates in this key psalm. Let me share a couple of sets of paintings inspired by other American landscapes in which I've actually lived. I'm showing you now my illuminations of Psalm 121 from I Will Wake the Dawn. Now, this scene, shown in cloud and sunshine, is the view from the intersection of, get this, the old Santa Fe Trail and the old Pecos Trail in Santa Fe, two of the most famous southwestern wagon train routes, not exactly ordinary streets. We lived in Santa Fe during the 2 years David worked at Los Alamos, and I drove my boys to school past this corner every day. A dear photographer friend who lives near the spot took photographs for me when I began these paintings so that I wouldn't have to work just from memory. Every morning passing it, I imagined this view like the gates of heaven. And when I lifted my eyes to the mountains, as the psalmist says, to paint these illuminations, this memory spoke to me. Now, do remember that starry sky border. I'll discuss that shortly. From the mountains to the sea now. These paintings of the palms singing in the wind beside the ocean were inspired by my memories of the rush of the wind through the palms during the many years we lived a couple of miles from the beach in San Diego. There's a great deal of both mystical and scientific symbolism in this painting, in both of these paintings rather, all explained, as with all my manuscripts, by commentaries in the published books. For me, the love of nature leads directly to an appreciation of the sciences that pervade American culture. And throughout my adult life, dinner table conversation has often revolved around David's career in physics and astrophysics, my own 15-year lay participation in the Medical Ethics Board, supervising human neurosciences research at the NIH in Bethesda, our kids' studies, and more recently, my husband Michael's career as a psychiatrist, attentive to current neuroscience. The freedom of scientific inquiry has been inextricably bound with the freedom of life, with the optimism of life in America, and through that, my own life and this work. So here you see interpretations of two psalms founded on the sciences. As you can see, the imagery of the deep sky behind the clouds at left is adapted from an earlier version, actually, of this famous Hubble Space Telescope image of the deep sky. I often use this image showing lights going back to the early universe, where the stars recycle every particle of time, matter, and space endlessly to allude to God's invisible but all-suffusing presence in the world. I also link the divine energy pouring down to earth with physics by depicting sound waves, that tangle of lines descending from the thundering clouds in the painting at the left. At the right, the central image presents a picture of the solar observatory at Kitt Peak, celebrating our divine gift of being able to probe, understand, and even attempt to master nature through science. The narrow colored lines in the star shape around the observatory painting present the spectral lines of hydrogen, sort of the key signature of chemicals observed in the light they emit, also drawn from astrophysical research. Free and open medical research has benefited all of our lives and played a critical role in mine. I'm showing you my paintings of Psalm 32 from I Will Wake the Dawn. I interpreted this prayer for divine rescue with imagery of David's treatment at the NIH for his rare, ultimately unique and fatal spinal cord cancer. At left, you see a surgical bandage on his back, being changed by a nurse, a task for which he was wholly dependent. At right, he was being measured for the first of his radiation treatments, all at the National Institutes of Health, where the then head of neuro-oncology was one of only 2 people on the planet who could even guess at what was going on inside his spinal cord. In that blue border dotted with pills, whose candy colors belie their sometimes devastating power, I played a rather bitter game with medieval manuscript motifs, usually showing flowers and insects tossed against a blue background. It was shortly after this, incidentally, that I was asked to join the Medical Ethics Board that I mentioned a moment ago. Sadly, at present, war and support for our troops are a prominent part of our consciousness as Americans. In these paintings of Psalm 116, I related the psalmist's passionate cry, "I trust out of suffering," to imagery drawn in part from ancient and modern war. Even in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II, Jews struggled to observe Jewish tradition, and the wine cup at right was used for blessing the Sabbath at one of the camps. The Shabbat candlestick at left was somehow made by a prisoner at another. At center, the burning scrolls whose letters rise up in flame draw upon a Jewish legend about the leading rabbis martyred by the Romans during the Judean wars of the 1st and 2nd centuries. As in World War I, our just wars have attempted to stop dangerous violations of human rights. And we all know that war takes a terrible toll on our warfighters. In this painting of the melee of Deborah's triumphant battle with the Canaanite General Sisera, I imagined the blood-soaked fog of war. This scene was inspired by a poem by the U.S. soldier poet Brian Turner, describing the numbing turbulence of an IED explosion in the first Iraq War. Luckily, one afternoon I caught an interview with him on NPR's Fresh Air, and later I gave my copy of Turner's book to my son, who had served in Afghanistan. We are all grateful for their service and the too many sacrifices of all our people who serve our country, laws, and values. Let me end with a prayer that our leadership will take inspiration from the heritage of wisdom and courage housed here in the Library of Congress to solve the problems and realize justice and opportunity for all Americans in our country that has been so divinely blessed by nature, our people, and our thought. Together, we all pray for the blessing of peace that America at its best helps realize for ourselves and our world and all our children and grandchildren. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for your inspiration.
Thank you.
And thank you for your lecture. So now time for questions. So anything?
And please don't be shy. Anything goes. Hi. Yes.
When you were writing the borders by hand, how long do you think each individual word would take to write down, just eyeballing it?
Micrography or
In the micrography, yes.
Oh, seconds.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you ever?
I think it takes me about 9 hours to do the Song of Songs.
Wow. Did you ever accidentally get some ink on something, or how did you clean that up to continue writing the micrography down?
It made me give up one of my secrets. One of the pleasures of working with calfskin is that it's really sturdy. I can hack at it carefully. I'm sorry, yes. I can hack at the calfskin with a single-edged razor blade carefully and erase almost everything. And and then if I, bear it down again, I can write over it. So yeah, this is a reason to work on calfskin. So, but And mistakes do happen. Yes?
Thanks. Oh, could you tell us how you got started on this journey?
Oh, really? Okay, it was a really silly domestic story. So my two sons are sitting right here. It has to do with the births of each. When my older son, Svi, was born, you understand, I had been reading and writing Hebrew since before I could read or write English. And when Svi was born, I used old-fashioned Hebrew letter set. Do you remember the press-on film lettering? I got the Hebrew version of that from Israel Bookstore in Boston and did his birth announcement and was really ashamed of myself. Like, I really ought to be doing the calligraphy. This is stupid. So when I was pregnant with Gabi 3 years later, I started studying Hebrew calligraphy so that I could do his birth announcement. You know, God forbid I should hire someone competent. Everything came together at once. And I was producing work that was exhibited within a year or so and started taking commissions for Ketubot shortly after that. And thank God, I've been very fortunate. So that's how. So, dumb domestic accident. Yes?
So when the printer is printing these for the books, do they do like a high scan, you know, a very, very detailed scan of each page, or how
Yeah,
are they getting?
I actually do the scans.
Oh, wow.
I have a semi-divine scanner on my credenza. And, since the first two books, starting with the third, I do the scans myself and then work very closely with the pre-press people, the pre-press guy, who prepares the files to actually go to printing. And we work very carefully on color correction. And in fact, one of my demands for any publisher now is that they work with my people because they know how to do this right after long experience. So yeah, there's a lot of attention to getting really fine scans and color correction that's as good as it can be when you're translating paint to CMYK printing. So.
This is brilliant work, Deborah. Do you bring formal art training to this, or is this also from yourself, this quality of art?
Mostly the latter. I did serious art school through high school at the High Museum in Atlanta, and started college at UCLA briefly, and then Concordia in Montreal. Started briefly in studio art, but it was the mid-'70s, and everything was loosey-goosey and do what you want, and I wanted very formal training, and I was doing lousy work and was bored out of my mind and dropped it, didn't pick up a paintbrush for 10 years, and instead studied history, Jewish studies, went on to do other stuff. And then it was through silly domestic accident over birth announcements that I mentioned that I got back into it. So some training, but I didn't say, I studied calligraphy with a very meticulous Hebrew calligrapher in Berkeley for a couple of years. But apart from that, I'm pretty much self-taught. So I made myself a real nuisance in many museums. I remember torturing the docent in Winchester Cathedral to see the technical notes for the Winchester Bible. So, years ago. Yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we saw an exhibit at the Morgan Library in New York where some of your work was, and the amount of precious metals on there was truly amazing. With the rise in price of gold and palladium and everything else now, are you still able to use the same materials, or are you forced to search for something a little more affordable?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. My work was not in that Morgan Library exhibit. It would have been wonderful if it had been. But so far as the gold goes, I use the real thing. That's, this is a luxury medium, And my motto has always, and I tend to be a fairly impatient person, and as every friends in the front row, my family will testify, this is someplace where I have to say, spare no expense, spare no time. It has to be done right. And the gold's expensive and it's rising. The vellum is expensive and has just risen, but such is life. It has to be done. It has to be done right. It's where it's gold, it's gold. Where it's palladium, it's palladium. So. Yes. Hi.
Art and hear. What
Well,
the-
this
also
will be
wisdom.
recorded. This is being recorded,
Oh, this-
and it will be on the Library of Congress website
Oh, that-
probably in usually a few weeks, few days. Ooh, things have improved.
Oh.
Great.
But I'm thinking your book, the book, also an audio version with different readers, because
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm thinking some people that maybe they can't read well or they're, whatever. But to hear different voices, starting with your voice and Menachem's voice, it would be amazing.
Interesting. Please contact Baylor University Press about that. But it'll have my support. Anything else?
Yes. Can you tell us more about your experience illustrated or painting on parchment instead
Sure.
of paper?
Sure. Okay.
The difficult.
So, I talked before about how economical it was because I ended up throwing away fewer sheets because of mistakes. And that's true, but that's not the real reason. Calfskin vellum is the traditional medium for Jewish manuscripts, and it's what's appropriate. And as I said, the rule has to be spare no expense, spare no time. It is costly. I've been fortunate to have, in the 30 years I've been doing this, 30 odd years, I've been able to have only 2 suppliers, and the present guy has been around for a long time. And it's wonderful to work on. It's just wonderful. It takes care. Sometimes it takes a little bit of preparation to remove the last little bit of oil that's embedded in the skin. So the vellum has 2 sides to it, right? There's the hair side, from which the hair has been, this is animal skin, has been scraped away and the oils removed. And then there's the inside, which was closer to the flesh of the body. And once it's beautifully prepared, the stuff I use is what's generally used for only the very best Torah scrolls. But there's still sometimes a little bit of oil left that I need to be careful about. It takes a firm brush to drive the colors into the fiber of the calf skin. And apart from that, it's a charm. And somehow, how to explain this? There's a feeling of greater dignity in doing it on this precious material than there would be on paper, or than there is on paper. And but for some things like paper cuts, it's miserable to do it on skin, and then you have all kinds of problems with it wanting to curl back up again. So, but this really is my preferred thing to work on. And
We experienced that you had one cut on parchment, I think, when you started.
On parchment when I started, well, I actually tried it. Yes. There, yes. That's right. There are a couple. That's right. There are a couple of paper cut chapter divisions that are on the skin. That wasn't easy to do. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was noting that I had done a couple of paper cuts on parchment in the books. And yes, that's true. In the Song of Songs book, there are actually 8 paper cuts done on the skin, and it's not a picnic. It's not fun. But that's what the book was in, and therefore that's what they needed to be in. So, although for Arise, Arise, I did those paper cuts on paper.
Deborah, can I ask you a question that has nothing to do with art?
Sure.
I'm over here.
Oh, Lyle, sorry. I'm sorry.
In the course of your work, 4 generations in your family, if I'm not mistaken, have observed the work, watched you work, reacted to it. Would you be willing to share some of their reactions to your work?
Well, one of my favorites is that my elder son, Svi, who's sitting right there. I would sometimes do, if I had a paper cut to do that was, not terribly intellectually consuming, and I could do without too much trouble, I'd occasionally take it on a drawing board to do in our family room while we were watching TV or something together at night. Svi would pick up the pieces, even from these very, very regular geometric paper cuts, but there's still a little bit of difference because it's by hand. He would pick up the little bits and pieces. Do you remember this? Yes. And stick them back unerringly in the right spots. So, but, this was something that I think this was a nice thing for the kids to grow up with because it's something they could understand. However, there was also a case, I remember this when Gabi was in elementary school and he was learning Hebrew. And there's a question about doing whether letters went forwards or backwards. And at that time, I was doing so much paper cutting, this is on paper, paper cutting of lettering. But to do that, I've drawn it out and traced it out and have to work from the back, where I get perfectly accustomed to reading it, that if he made letters backwards, I couldn't necessarily pick it out. And his teachers would say, "What on earth were you thinking? You couldn't see that he was writing this backwards or upside down or whatever it was." So, yeah, but the boys have always been extremely supportive and engaged, and it's something they could, I think, understand. Would you say? What about Sabbath? Oh, my father-in-law. Oh, yes. My father-in-law was deeply involved with my work. I had been fiddling with doing the Song of Songs for probably a couple of years before I really started getting anywhere. I didn't have a central organizing principle in my head, and so what I was doing was rather a hash. And I'd take him pieces to look at, and he'd trash them. And I'd be somewhat crestfallen, go back to the drawing board, and it was only when his criticism started getting constructive instead of completely destructive. He was a tough guy. All the students 50 years of students would testify. Oh, my father-in-law, I'm sorry, Arnold Band, who was one of the formative scholars of Hebrew literary studies. He taught at UCLA and the Hebrew University. And we were very deeply involved as family. They may or may not be across the country from us, but we were always very closely involved. My introduction to life with him actually was when I went to LA to meet them senior year of college. I was working on my undergraduate thesis on Jewish traders in the Rhineland, and I had done a lot of Latin translations from the Latin of Jewish charters for various towns along the Rhineland, and he sat there and corrected my Latin. So this is a future father-in-law. So I was used to being called down, but it was when his criticism on the Shir Hashrim stuff began to get constructive that I realized I must be onto something. So, but he was always very deeply involved, and we collaborated on 3 projects. The last of which was the small book I did based on the medieval text Perek Shira, which was the last publication that his name was on. He did the translations for me. So, the book for Dolly, thank you. Gabi, thank you. Yes. my granddaughter Dahlia, the eldest of the tribe, is sitting there on her auntie's lap. And when she was born, I decided I wanted to do a book to celebrate the advent of my first grandchild. And so there's a little medieval text called Perek Shira, Chapter of Songs, that takes praises of God from across mostly the Bible, almost all of that, Psalms, and a couple of bits from the Talmud and so on, and puts these praises of God into things from the natural world. And it's absolutely delightful. It's really beloved in the mystical community. I had, as absorbed with kids as I was sure it had been done for educational purposes, but I'm probably wrong. But I took that work, boiled it down to 22 verses, organized them according to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and did a book for that. And those paintings will belong to Dahlia when she reaches the right age. And it's been published with Sharon and Steve's help. So, but the family's been very involved. Yes? It's a variation on the honeybee theme. Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. Forgive me. I'm sorry, dolls. Yes, in that book, I did not only a tiny honeybee, there's sort of a Where's Waldo came in almost all my work, but I also put a tiny dahlia in each of the paintings because we're together. So, and I haven't yet done books for the other grandchildren yet. So.
Debbie, do you teach, or have you found a way to pass on your talents and your skills?
Sorry, Avi, let me take this here. Have I found a way of passing this on? Alas, no. I proposed to one leading Jewish educational institution in New York that I would be willing to go and do a workshop with people there, and they had other things cooking and did not bite. So a friend of mine at Duke is constantly after me to find ways of teaching, but I haven't found the means yet, and my own house is not such that I could really do that. So, but if anyone has ideas, I'd be happy to do it.
Hello.
Hi.
I had a question about one of your images. Mm-hmm. It was on one of the earlier slides, but I noticed 11 stars going to the left and 7 to the right, and I just was curious, is there some symbolism behind the number or placement of the stars? It was on the image, I think, next to Ruth, or with Ruth. I just wasn't sure with the 18 stars and 11 to the left and 7 to the right, if it was like a lineage or representative of something.
You counted them?
I did.
Oh, all honors to you. If it was 18, I intended it to allude to the word for life in Hebrew chai, which is made up of the letters 18, literally. And if it was 11, it was relating to Jacob's 11 sons.
Well, it's 18 split, so that's what I thought, 11 to the left, and then it was 7 to the right.
Oh, then that's just how I managed to split it up. That's all, most likely. Most likely. So.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is a great honor.